All right, let's jump right in. We're going to break down the wild story of an investment that started as a golden ticket and then turned into a total trap. This one really tells us a lot about timing, risk, and, well, reality. This whole thing starts with a confession. The analyst whose work inspired this breakdown admitted that solar power was the one investment they truly, deeply regret missing out on. It was pitched as a once-in-a-generation opportunity. And there's the big question, right? If this was such an amazing, can't-miss deal, how on earth did it end up becoming a horror story for so many people? To get that, we've got to rewind the clock all the way back to the beginning. So our story really kicks off with just a single number. A number that honestly sounded way too good to be true. Probably because in any normal, functioning market, it absolutely would have been. And here it is, 42 yen per kilowatt hour. See, back in 2012, the Japanese government promised it would buy solar energy at this fixed price for 20 years straight. Now, you have to understand just how insanely high this price was. This wasn't a little nudge. This was a massive, state-sponsored rocket booster for the industry. So here's the key takeaway. This wasn't your typical investment where you're betting on the market. Nope. This was something we can call state-sponsored arbitrage. The government literally created a nearly risk-free system for profit. For the folks who got in early, it wasn't about gambling, it was about showing up to collect on a government IOU. Okay, so if it was such a sure thing, why didn't every single person just jump in and get rich? Well, this is where the dream meets the cold, hard reality of how things actually work. Think about it. Back in 2012, this was basically a black box for the average person. Nobody knew what solar panels were supposed to cost. You had no clue about construction, no practical knowledge of the electrical work, and you needed a ton of capital just to get in the game. So for most people, including the analysts we're talking about, the only sane choice was to stay on the sidelines. But then, things started to shift. The market opened up, information got out there, and panel prices started to drop. It actually became easier to get into solar. And that's precisely when it all became so dangerous. This slide just lays it out perfectly. In the early golden age, that 42 yen price gave you this massive cushion of profit. A storm could knock out a few panels, whatever, you were still making fantastic money. But fast forward to the danger zone when the government's buyback price was way lower, suddenly the margins were paper thin. Every single one of those risks had to be calculated with surgical precision because one little thing going wrong could completely wipe you out. And this is the trap, right here. The story of the golden age, the story of easy, guaranteed money, was still being sold to new people coming into the market. But the actual advantage, that ridiculously high government-backed price, it was long gone. People were buying into a memory, not the reality of the situation. So let's take a closer look at those risks that were always there, kind of lurking under the surface. The ones that the later investors just couldn't afford to ignore anymore. Okay, so your entire business model is completely dependent on a government policy not changing. Your equipment is delicate. You're vulnerable to typhoons and earthquakes. And here's a big one. What's your exit strategy? It turns out it's incredibly hard to sell these things. Oh, and nobody really knows what it's going to cost to dispose of all those panels in 20 years. For the early birds, the huge profits made these risks basically irrelevant. For everyone who came later, they were financial landmines waiting to go off. So after all that, what is the real lesson here? Because, this story goes way beyond just solar panels. Man, this quote is just so powerful. And it's not saying don't do your homework. What it's really saying is that in these super fast-moving, policy-driven markets, the time it takes for you to study and become a true expert is often the exact same amount of time it takes for the opportunity to vanish completely. So the key isn't just about studying. It's about developing what the source material calls instantaneous power. And this doesn't mean being reckless, not at all. It's about a kind of prepared decisiveness. It means you're always scanning the horizon, you're brutally honest about what you know and what you don't, you can tell the difference between a smart risk and a dumb gamble, and you have the confidence to act when that moment arrives. And this really leaves us with a pretty tough question. These government-backed opportunities are often a brutal first-come, first-served game. If you show up too early, the rules aren't even written yet, and you can't get in. But if you show up too late, you're stuck playing what feels like a penalty game. It's just a harsh truth of investing, and this solar trap is one of the clearest, most painful examples of it you'll ever see. It's definitely something to think about.